Hey y'all, my name is Brandon Paul from the class of 2016, and I'm here to teach y'all how to pick locks. Uh, so lockpicking is where you use one of these, the little lockpicking kit, and you use picks to open up stuff like this, little padlocks. So from this tutorial, you're going to learn about how locks function, which you should have learned in class already, but we'll go over briefly. And hopefully give y'all a guided tutorial to teach y'all how to pick some simple locks. For this, you can do stuff like I showed you before. These are just locks you can find at Home Depot. You'll be able to do suitcase locks, stuff like that. You're not gonna be able to do doors. Nothing too fancy. This is just a very basic tutorial. Before we get into all that, you might think lockpicking is really cool and all, and it is, but these are considered burglary tools. So don't go like walking around with this in your pocket or your backpack or something like that. Just for your safety. If you really want to get into lockpicking, do it from your own home. No point in getting in trouble. So yeah, we're going to go into some kind of basic terms that'll help you understand the stuff I'm talking about, and then we will dive into the guide. This right here is the demo lock we're going to look at first. This will help you understand the terminology and more or less what's involved in a lock. Because once we start moving into real locks, we're not going to be able to see the insides. So, this is a basic lock. There's four main parts that I want to discuss about this lock for you to understand how to actually pick it. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to actually pick this lock yet. What I'm just going to do is show you how the lock itself works. So you'll notice that there's a gold cylinder right here, and you'll see that there's these gold metal-looking rods that are sticking up. So the rods themselves are actually composed of two parts. So I'm going to go ahead and put the pick inside and move some of the parts around so you can see. So, this part right here, let me see if I can point to it. This part on the end of my finger, this is called the driver. Now, behind the driver is a spring that pushes the driver downward. Right below that, you'll actually notice that there's a slight separation right there, that line. Below that is the actual pin of the lock. As you'll notice, when I move my pick downward, the driver pushes the pin downward. And then when I lift up, it pushes the pin upward. This line that separates the pin and the driver is called the shear line. Now, the shear line, theoretically, is supposed to line up with the cylinder being this big metal part here. As you'll notice, all of these are at different levels, so I need to actually move each of these individually, get my pick in, so that they line up with the cylinder. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the actual key to this inside, and you'll notice when I put the key in that all of the drivers and all of the pins are lined up with the cylinder. So the shear line right now is completely in line with the cylinder, and when that happens, I can turn the key and the lock opens. I'm going to go and lock it back. Now, the idea behind lock picking is, suppose you don't have a key, how do you get into the lock? The way you do that is you use a tool like this. This is the first tool we're going to talk about. This is called a short hook, and you can use this to move these drivers up and down to try to line up the pins at the shear line. Just kind of reviewing a little bit. You got driver with the spring to move up and down. That one's a little long. Let's try that. Below the driver, you have the pin. It's supposed to line up at the shear line. And the part that you actually rotate is called the cylinder. So go ahead and pause the video now, just to give you guys some time to mess around with the lock, see how it works. So now we are actually going to discuss how to pick a lock. One thing you'll notice from just messing around with the lock is that when you move the drivers up and down, the pins don't stay. So just to show you that, if I insert the pick and I start, let's see if I can find one. I'm moving the second to last driver right now. As you can see, I'm pushing it a little past the shear line, but when I release that vertical force, all of a sudden the pin is no longer lined up at the shear line. And keep in mind, I need to line up all of these pins, so I can't hold all of these at once. Lockpicking involves the use of this. This is called a torque wrench. If you've taken any physics class or just know what torque is, it is rotational force. The idea behind the torque wrench is to apply as it's described, I guess, rotational force on the lock in the same way that you would turning a key. So what you can do is insert the torque wrench at the bottom of the lock, and then I personally just use my finger. You can also use your thumb. If you put it behind the lock, what you can do is reach around and pull downward like this to actually rotate the lock. And you'll be able to see a little bit of movement in a sec, as you can see. See that? So what I'm doing is I'm applying like a turning force in the same way that you would when you put in a key to turn it. What happens now is the cylinder has rotated slightly. And one thing you'll notice is that as you're applying tension, as you can see, I'm actually like pushing downward, you will be able to line the pins up at the shear line in a way that the driver won't push them down. So I'll show you. I'm going to insert the pick, and we'll start with, let's see if I can find one. So this is the second to last one that I'm moving up and down, as you can see. So right now it's above the shear line. You can see the pin right below it, and I need the driver right above it to line up with the cylinder. Well, one thing you'll notice now that I'm applying this rotational force using the tension wrench, when I lower the the pin, the driver actually stays in place. So it is now currently lined up. And it just so happened that these next two are also lined up. So the one behind it, the third pin right now is not lined up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some slight pressure. I'm actually going to push it above the shear line so you can see. So this third pin right now is above the shear line. I'm going to lower it so it lines up with the cylinder. Now we're going to go to the second one, which is more or less lined up. And now for the first one. The first one you can see very clearly that it's significantly lower. I'm going to push it slightly upward and see if I can get it to line up. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and this is actually a perfect example of it, pins are not always going to stay. So as you can see, this driver is immediately falling even though I've lined it up. And another important note, it may seem right now that all of my drivers are lined up, but if even one of these is a little bit off, it won't be able to unlock. So I'm going to do real quick, I'm going to go through, make sure all of these pins are more or less in place. That's good. And we'll see if we can get this first one to line up. And you've now picked a lock. So once again, just pause the video here to kind of give you guys a chance to actually work with that. And actually, you don't necessarily need to pause now. You can keep working, and I'm going to show you the process one more time. So I'm going to take the torque wrench, insert it into the bottom of the lock. I'm going to take my finger and apply a little bit of rotational force, I suppose, on the lock. And then I'm going to take my pick, I'm going to insert it into the lock, into the cylinder, and I'm just going to line up each one of these pins with the cylinder right at the shear line. Let's see. I can't move the first one. Well, it's not going as planned. There we go. Alrighty, so now pause the video and give that a shot, see what you can do. So at this point, hopefully some or most of y'all have been able to successfully pick this test lock. Unfortunately, as you probably have realized, you're not going to be able to see the internals of a lock when you're actually trying to pick. So the reason these test locks are so nice to work with is because they show you how to feel the pins and drivers as you work with them. What we're going to do now is we're going to switch to an actual lock. So this is just one I picked up at Home Depot. It's pretty generic. It's not necessarily a small lock. Like I'll show you one of those later. It's a pretty substantial lock. Like this is what you'd see on a gate, or some people use these on their lockers. And I'm going to show you that we're actually able to pick something like this with the skills we learned in the previous sections. So as before, as with the clear lock, we're going to take our lock and we're going to insert the torque wrench like so. And then we're going to take our finger and push downward in the same way we did before to slightly rotate the lock. Now the next part, once again, we're going to take our short hook and we're going to insert into the lock. Now, unlike the previous lock, we're not able to see anything that's going on inside of this lock. in order to pick this lock, we have to be able to either feel or hear when the drivers are aligned at the shear line. Now, I don't know how well the audio is going to come through on this, but you'll be able to hear a very slight click when some of them fall into place. With others, you'll just be able to feel that suddenly there's less tension on the pin. So, I always personally start in the back of the lock and work my way forward. You can start in the front and work your way back. Either way is fine. So, I'm starting from the very back, and I'm just tweaking it up and down. I can now feel that the back one is lined up. I move slightly forward to get the next pin, which I have now lined, moving right along through the cylinder. Now we're nearing the front. And once you have all of them lined up, you'll be able to feel actually on the torque wrench when you get it. You can twist, and it's just like a key, all of a sudden you've unlocked the lock. So now I'm going to go through kind of a summary of how to pick this lock. So we take the torque wrench, insert it into the bottom of the lock, apply force. We now take our pick, insert it into the cylinder, and we start navigating the pins to line up the drivers at the shear line. For some of these you'll be able to actually hear the click as they fall into place. And then you can rotate the torque wrench to actually unlock it. Now, this doesn't just apply to this particular lock. This is actually kind of a more challenging one. You can do this with a wide variety of locks. Some of these I just picked up around my house, from Rick's room, off of suitcases. Pretty much any type of lock, any of these small locks that you can find, you'll be able to pick with these tools. Just to give you an example, so this is a much smaller lock. This is off of a suitcase, and so same process. Take the torque wrench, insert it into the bottom. This is a very small lock, so it's kind of hard to navigate. Let's see if I can get it. Put the short hook inside. It doesn't even fit. Wow. There we go. And now we start lining up the pins. This is a 2-pin. And once we have all the drivers in line at the shear line, you can unlock it. So that's all I have for this presentation. I hope this guide was informative and interesting. If you're really interested in lockpicking, you can go and buy a lockpick set. You can find these online. As I explained before, be careful with these. And just start practicing on locks. You can pretty much buy anything you can buy from Home Depot. You'll be able to pick through. And as you'll notice in the lockpicking set, there's a lot of different tools in here. We only covered one of them, and that's the short hook. You'll be able to pick most things with this, but there are very specific locks and very specific situations where you can use different tools and make it a little bit quicker. So if you're really interested, there's a lot of online resources. You can look into that. But yeah, like I said, just be careful with it. It's a cool little thing to learn how to do, but it can be a little bit dangerous. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope that was informative, and good luck with Rick's class.